Remember your place. The life-saving happens on this side of the table.
His pressure is collapsing. The bleeding isn't in the abdomen.
A nurse telling me where to cut? 20 years passing instruments doesn't make you a surgeon.
If we don't move now, he dies.
Bannon snatched the scalpel and shoved it toward her.
Then prove it. Pick up the blade and save him yourself.
Marisol didn't move. The monitors screamed louder. Residents froze. The anesthesiologist watched the patient's vitals crash. Bannon folded his arms and smiled.
Go ahead. Save him. If you do, I'll quit.
Dr. Pierce Bannon had just challenged the only person in that room who knew how to keep his patient alive. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The operating room lights cast harsh shadows across Evan Rusk's pale face. His chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, the ventilator doing what his body couldn't manage alone. Blood seeped through surgical drapes despite Dr. Pierce Bannon's confident hands working inside the open cavity. Marisol Baptiste stood at the surgical field, her dark eyes tracking every detail. 20 years of OR experience had taught her to read the small signs that others missed. She watched the monitors with growing concern. BP dropping to 90/60. Dr. Niles Mercer called from behind his anesthesia machine. His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned not to panic surgeons. Marisol's gaze moved from the blood pressure reading to Evan's exposed upper chest. A faint bluish discoloration was spreading near his collarbone. Not the normal surgical bruising, something else. "Dr. Bannon," she said, keeping her voice steady. His pressure's falling faster than the visible bleeding should cause. Bannon didn't look up from his work. "Hand me the right angle clamp." Marisol placed the instrument in his palm, but her eyes stayed fixed on the monitors. Evan's oxygen saturation was dropping. 94%. 92. The central venous pressure reading made her stomach tighten. "Doctor, I think we need to consider—" "I didn't ask for your thoughts," Bannon snapped. His silver hair caught the surgical lights as he turned slightly toward her. "Hand instruments, not opinions." The younger nurses at the periphery went silent. Tessa Vale, barely 2 years out of nursing school, stepped back from the table. Even the surgical tech stopped moving. Marisol felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to speak. "The bleeding pattern suggests thoracic outlet involvement, possibly subclavian." "Enough." Bannon's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You're a nurse, Baptiste. Act like one." Dr. Mercer cleared his throat softly. "Pierce, his SAT's at 89 now. Something's not right." The monitors began their insistent beeping. Evan's blood pressure had dropped to 70/40. His heart rate climbed past 120, then 130. Marisol watched the bluish mottling spread. She'd seen this once before, years ago, during her surgical residency, before everything changed, before she'd been forced to abandon that dream and settle for standing on this side of the table. "Dr. Bannon," she said, her voice carrying new urgency. "He's going into obstructive shock. There's bleeding we can't see, near the thoracic outlet." Bannon straightened, his hands still inside Evan's chest. His face had gone red above his surgical mask. "How dare you try to diagnose in my OR? I'm not trying to. You're trying to embarrass me in front of my team." His voice rose, sharp and cutting. "You think 20 years of nursing school makes you qualified to second-guess a cardiothoracic surgeon?" The room felt frozen. Even the ventilators seemed to quiet. Marisol met his furious gaze across the sterile field. "I think a dying patient makes me qualified to speak up." Bannon's eyes went cold. He pointed his blood-stained glove directly at her. "You'll never be a surgeon, Baptiste. Never." The silence that followed Bannon's cruel words lasted only seconds before the monitors erupted in chaos. Evan's heart rhythm spiked into dangerous territory, the electronic beeping turning shrill and urgent. His blood pressure plummeted to 60/30. Marisol forced herself to look away from Bannon's sneering face. She couldn't save Evan by fighting the surgeon's ego. She had to save him despite it. "VTOC." Dr. Mercer announced, his voice tight with alarm. The anesthesiologist's hands moved quickly across his equipment. He's throwing PVCs. This isn't good, Pierce. Marisol stepped closer to the table, her trained eyes assessing Evan's condition. The bluish discoloration had spread further across his upper chest. His neck veins were distended despite the blood loss. Classic signs of obstructive shock caused by internal bleeding compressing the heart. "Dr. Bannon," she said, keeping her voice professional and calm. "I need a vascular clamp, long DeBakey forceps, and a fresh number 10 scalpel." Bannon whirled around from where he'd been searching Evan's abdomen. "You need to step back from my patient. He's not bleeding enough in the abdomen to cause this pressure drop." Marisol pressed on. "The source is higher, near the subclavian vessels or the thoracic outlet. If we don't decompress..." "If we don't what?" Bannon's voice dripped with mockery. "If we don't let the nurse play surgeon. Is that your professional recommendation?" The surgical residents exchanged nervous glances. Tessa Vale gripped the back rail so hard her knuckles went white. Even the experienced OR tech had frozen, unsure whether to follow Marisol's instrument requests or wait for Bannon's orders. Dr. Mercer's voice cut through the tension. "Pierce, his pressure's critical. We're looking at cardiac arrest in the next few minutes if something doesn't change." Marisol pointed to the monitor displaying Evan's central venous pressure. "Look at the CVP reading. 18 millimeters of mercury and climbing. His neck veins are distended. The chest pressure is compressing venous return to the heart. Continue searching the abdomen," Bannon ordered the residents. "The bleeding source is in the operative field." "It's not in the abdomen," Marisol said, her voice growing stronger. "The pressure differential, the venous collapse pattern, the rapid deterioration, it's all pointing to bleeding above the diaphragm. Hidden bleeding that's creating a tamponade effect." Bannon laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the sterile walls. "Listen to her. She's watched enough surgeries to think she understands vascular anatomy." The monitors screamed louder. Evan's oxygen saturation dropped to 85%. "Doctor, please," Marisol said. "Let me extend the incision superiorly. I can identify the bleeding source and control it while you..." "While I what?" "While I stand here and let a nurse take over my operating room?" Bannon's face had gone purple with rage. "You think because you've handed instruments to real surgeons for 20 years, that makes you qualified to touch a scalpel?" Marisol felt every eye in the room on her. The residents, the nurses, the techs, all waiting to see if she would back down, all knowing that challenging Dr. Pierce Bannon was career suicide. But Evan's life was slipping away with each passing second. "I'm asking for permission to help save this patient's life," she said quietly. Bannon stepped closer to the table, positioning himself between Marisol and the instrument tray. His eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. "You want to save him? You think you're good enough?" He gestured dramatically toward the surgical residents and nurses, watching in stunned silence. "Fine. Here's your chance to prove it." His voice rose, filling every corner of the operating room with venomous challenge. "If you save him, I'll quit!" The words hung in the air like a dare. Every person in the room understood what had just happened. Bannon had thrown down a gauntlet that would destroy one of their careers, either Marisol's for failing or his own if she somehow succeeded. Dr. Mercer's voice broke the silence. "Pierce, his rhythm's deteriorating. We don't have time for..." "She wants to play surgeon," Bannon interrupted, his gaze never leaving Marisol's face. "Let her try." Marisol looked at Bannon's triumphant expression. Then she looked at the monitors showing Evan's failing vitals. She thought of his wife in the waiting room, his young daughter at home. She reached for the scalpel. Marisol's fingers closed around the scalpel handle. The weight felt familiar, comforting even. She had held thousands of instruments over the years, but this moment was different. This time, she wasn't handing the blade to someone else. "Security!" Bannon shouted, his voice cracking with rage. "Get her away from my patient!" But no one moved. The security guards stationed outside the OR couldn't hear through the thick doors, and everyone inside the room could see what Bannon refused to acknowledge. Evan Rusk was dying. The monitors painted a terrifying picture. Heart rate climbing toward dangerous territory. Blood pressure bottoming out. Oxygen saturation falling like a stone. Dr. Mercer's hands flew over his controls, adjusting medications, increasing oxygen flow, doing everything possible to keep Evan's failing systems functional. 2 minutes, Dr. Mercer announced grimly. Maybe 3, before we lose him entirely. Marisol tuned out Bannon's shouting and focused on the surgical field. She could see the problem clearly now. The chest wall had a subtle asymmetry, the kind that spoke of hidden bleeding, creating pressure where it shouldn't exist. The bluish mottling near Evan's collarbone had darkened, spreading like a bruise beneath the skin. She positioned the scalpel at the superior edge of the existing incision. Her hands were steady. 20 years of surgical experience guided every movement, even if she'd spent those years as the assistant rather than the lead. "Don't you dare!" Bannon hissed, reaching toward her arm. Marisol made the cut. It was precise, controlled, extending the surgical access exactly where she needed it. Blood welled up immediately, but not the chaotic hemorrhage Bannon had predicted. This was surgical bleeding, purposeful, necessary, revealing what lay beneath. "Suction!" she called out. Tessa Vale hesitated for a split second, her young face torn between following orders and protecting her job. Then she grabbed the suction device and positioned it exactly where Marisol indicated. The blood cleared away, revealing the anatomy beneath. Marisol's breath caught. There it was, a partial tear in the subclavian artery, hidden behind the clavicle, bleeding steadily into the thoracic space. The accumulated blood was compressing Evan's heart, preventing proper filling and circulation. "Jesus!" one of the residents whispered. "Dr. Mercer, continue rapid transfusion protocol," Marisol ordered, her voice calm and authoritative. 2 units of O negative, wide open, and push another amp of epi. "Already on it," Mercer replied, his tone carrying new respect. Marisol extended her hand toward Tessa. "DeBakey clamp, the long one." Tessa didn't hesitate this time. She slapped the instrument into Marisol's palm with surgical precision. The young nurse had found her courage. Blood flooded the surgical field as Marisol worked to isolate the damaged vessel. Her movements were economical, efficient. She had studied vascular anatomy for years during her abandoned surgical residency, and the knowledge came flooding back now when it mattered most. "Pressure's climbing," Dr. Mercer announced, wonder creeping into his voice. 80/50, and rising. Marisol positioned the vascular clamp above and below the arterial tear, temporarily stopping the bleeding. The immediate crisis was under control, but the repair work would require delicate technique. She looked up at the monitors and saw what she'd hoped for. Evan's vital signs stabilizing. "Tessa, I need you to maintain gentle pressure right here," Marisol instructed, guiding the young nurse's hands to the optimal position. "Not too firm. We want to control bleeding without compromising flow to the arm." The OR had transformed. What had been chaos moments before now moved with surgical precision. Even the residents seemed to understand. They were witnessing something extraordinary. Not just a successful emergency intervention, but a masterclass in crisis management. Dr. Mercer's voice carried across the room like a prayer answered. Sinus rhythm returning. Pressures up to 90/60. O2 sat climbing back toward normal ranges. The change was visible even to the untrained eye. Color returned to Evan's face. The dangerous blue mottling began to fade. The monitors that had been screaming warnings now hummed with more reassuring sounds. Marisol maintained her focus on the surgical field, but she could feel the shift in the room's energy. The nurses stood straighter. The residents leaned in, eager to learn. Even Dr. Mercer had moved closer to observe her technique. Only Bannon remained frozen in place, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. "The bleeding's controlled," Marisol announced. "We need vascular surgery for the definitive repair, but the immediate threat is neutralized. The pressure on his heart has been relieved." She looked up at the monitors one more time. Evan's vital signs continued to improve steadily. Heart rate settling into normal range. Blood pressure holding steady. oxygen saturation back above 95%. The room understood what had happened. Marisol had seen what Dr. Pierce Bannon, the celebrated cardiothoracic surgeon, had missed entirely. She had identified a hidden injury that would have killed their patient within minutes, and she had saved Evan's life with surgical skill that rivaled any attending physician in the hospital. Bannon slowly pulled off his bloody gloves, his movements mechanical and deliberate. He dropped them in the waste bin with exaggerated care, then stepped close to Marisol, close enough that only she could hear his words. His voice was quiet, controlled, and filled with deadly promise. "You just destroyed your career." The surgical sink's cold water ran red as Marisol scrubbed blood from beneath her fingernails. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar ritual: soap, scrub, rinse, repeat, while her mind replayed every moment of the last hour. The weight of what had happened pressed against her chest like a physical thing. Evan Rusk was alive. That single fact anchored her against the storm she could feel building around her. The recovery corridor buzzed with nervous energy. Residents whispered in corners, their voices too low to catch individual words, but their tone unmistakable. Nurses moved with careful efficiency, avoiding eye contact as they passed. Even the housekeeping staff seemed to sense something had shifted in the hospital's carefully maintained order. Dr. Mercer appeared beside her at the sink, his usually composed face showing signs of strain. He glanced around the corridor before speaking, making sure no one could overhear. "That was remarkable work in there," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen a lot of emergency surgeries, and what you did—" He shook his head. "Bannon would have lost him. We all knew it." Marisol continued scrubbing, not trusting herself to respond immediately. The validation felt good, but something cold had settled in her stomach the moment Bannon made his threat. "You saw the subclavian tear before anyone else," Mercer continued. "Your positioning of that clamp probably saved his life. I wanted you to know that." She finally looked up, meeting his eyes in the mirror above the sink. "Then you'll say so if anyone asks?" Mercer's expression tightened. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears about career security and hospital politics. "I'll tell the truth," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Tessa Vale rushed up to them, her young face flushed with excitement and residual adrenaline. Unlike the others, she showed no signs of avoiding Marisol. If anything, she seemed drawn to her like a magnet. "Marisol, that was incredible," Tessa said, her words tumbling over each other. "I mean, when you made that incision and found the bleeding and the way you controlled everything, Evan would be dead right now without you. Everyone in that room knows it." The young nurse's enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment Marisol allowed herself to believe that truth might actually matter in this place, that skill and courage could speak louder than politics and hierarchy. "I just did what needed doing," Marisol replied, but warmth crept into her voice despite her caution. "No, you did what Bannon couldn't do," Tessa insisted. "You saved a man's life while he was still trying to figure out what was wrong." Dr. Mercer shifted uncomfortably beside them. "Keep your voice down, Tessa. These corridors have ears." The warning proved prophetic. The elevator at the far end of the corridor chimed, and 3 figures emerged with the purposeful stride of people carrying bad news. Celia Marr led the group, her expensive suit and perfectly arranged silver hair marking her as management, even from a distance. 2 younger administrators flanked her, both carrying tablets and wearing expressions of professional concern. The conversations in the corridor died as staff recognized the COO's presence. Nurses found sudden urgent tasks elsewhere. Residents discovered compelling reasons to check on patients in distant rooms. Within seconds, the recovery area had cleared except for Marisol, Dr. Mercer, and Tessa. Celia approached with the measured pace of someone who controlled every aspect of her environment. Her smile was polished and empty, the kind practiced in countless donor meetings and board presentations. "Ms. Baptiste," she said, her tone carrying false warmth, "I need to speak with you immediately about the incident in OR3. Marisol felt her stomach drop, The word incident landed like a physical blow, not emergency surgery or life-saving intervention. Incident. Dr. Bannon has filed an emergency complaint with hospital administration, Celia continued, consulting one of the tablets her assistants carried. He alleges that you performed unauthorized surgical procedures without physician oversight, potentially endangering the patient's life. The words hit Marisol like ice water. Unauthorized? I saved that man's life. Bannon was missing the diagnosis entirely. That's not how the preliminary operative report reads. One of the administrators interjected, his voice carrying bureaucratic satisfaction. According to Dr. Bannon's documentation, he identified the subclavian injury and directed the emergency repair. You're listed as the assisting nurse who helped implement his surgical plan. Marisol's vision narrowed. The walls of the corridor seemed to close in around her as the full scope of Bannon's betrayal became clear. He wasn't just taking credit for her work. He was painting her as a rogue employee who had endangered a patient's life. "Let me see that report," she demanded, reaching for the tablet. Celia pulled it back smoothly. "I'm afraid that's not possible during an active investigation. What I can tell you is that, effective immediately, you're suspended from all surgical duties pending a full review of your actions." "My actions saved Evan Rusk's life," Marisol said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "According to Dr. Bannon, your actions nearly killed him," Celia replied coldly. "The operative note clearly states that you acted against direct orders and created additional surgical trauma that complicated the repair." Tessa stepped forward, her young face blazing with indignation. "That's not true. I was there. Marisol found the bleeding that Bannon missed. She controlled it perfectly." Celia's gaze shifted to the young nurse with predatory interest. "Miss Vale, isn't it? I suggest you be very careful about making statements that contradict attending physician documentation. False allegations can be grounds for termination." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Tessa's face went pale, but her jaw remained set with stubborn determination. "Furthermore," Celia continued, turning back to Marisol, "you are not to contact the patient's family or discuss this matter with any staff members during the investigation period. Any violation of this directive will result in immediate termination and potential legal action." Dr. Mercer had retreated several steps during the confrontation, his earlier words of support apparently forgotten in the face of administrative pressure. He studied the floor tiles with intense concentration. "I'm also placing a security escort on you for the remainder of the day," Celia added, with bureaucratic efficiency, "just to ensure there are no misunderstandings about your status." As if summoned by her words, 2 hospital security officers appeared from the elevator. They wore the polite but firm expressions of people accustomed to removing unwanted individuals from the premises. Marisol looked around the corridor one final time. The place where she had worked for 15 years, where she had saved countless lives, where she had just performed the most important surgery of her career. Now it felt foreign, hostile, transformed by the simple act of telling the truth. The security officers flanked her with professional courtesy. No handcuffs, no rough treatment, just the unmistakable message that she was no longer welcome in the place she had called home for most of her adult life. As they walked toward the elevator, Marisol caught sight of Dr. Pierce Bannon emerging from the family consultation room at the far end of the corridor. He moved with confident stride, his white coat pristine, his expression composed and sympathetic. He was walking toward Evan's family to accept their gratitude for saving their husband and father's life. Their eyes met across the distance of the corridor. Bannon's slight smile contained no warmth, only the satisfaction of a predator who had successfully defended his territory. The elevator doors closed between them. The main hospital corridor stretched before Marisol like a gauntlet of whispered conversation and averted eyes. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors where she had walked confidently for 15 years. Now she carried her belongings in a clear plastic security bag. The final humiliation in a day that had stripped away everything she thought she understood about justice. The bag contained pathetic remnants of her professional life. A stethoscope worn smooth by years of use, reading glasses, breath mints, and a small photo of her mother that she kept in her locker. Everything else, her surgical reference cards, her emergency medication guide, her collection of specialized clamps, remained locked away, deemed too dangerous for someone under investigation. She moved slowly toward the main entrance, hyper-aware of every conversation that stopped when she passed, every glance that quickly looked away. The hospital felt different now, transformed from a place of healing into something cold and predatory. Near the elevator bank, she heard familiar voices and instinctively slowed her pace. 2 surgical residents stood by the vending machines, their conversation carrying clearly in the afternoon lull. "Did you see what happened in OR3 today?" the taller one asked, feeding coins into the machine. "Heard Bannon had some kind of meltdown," his companion replied. "Something about the nurse overstepping. That's not what I heard." The first resident lowered his voice, but not enough. "I heard the nurse saved the guy, found bleeding that Bannon missed completely." "No way. Bannon's one of the best cardiac surgeons in the state." "I'm telling you, man. The scrub tech told me the patient would have died if she hadn't acted. Said it was incredible to watch." Marisol felt her chest tighten. Somewhere in this building, the truth still lived in the minds of people who had witnessed it. But witness accounts meant nothing against administrative power and carefully crafted lies. She was almost to the main entrance when she heard her name called from behind. "Excuse me, Ms. Baptiste." Marisol turned to see a woman hurrying toward her, moving with the determined stride of someone who wouldn't be ignored. April Rusk was smaller than she had appeared from a distance, but her presence filled the corridor with fierce energy. Her dark hair was pulled back carelessly, her clothes wrinkled from hours of hospital waiting, and her eyes held the sharp focus of someone who had spent the day asking questions and getting evasive answers. "You're Marisol Baptiste, aren't you?" April said, slightly out of breath from her pursuit. "You were in my husband's surgery." Marisol's heart hammered against her ribs. Celia's warning echoed in her mind. No contact with the family, no discussion of the surgery, no violations that could lead to termination and legal action. "I can't," she began. "I don't want you to say anything you're not supposed to," April interrupted, her voice carrying an edge of steel. "But I've been listening all afternoon, to doctors, nurses, residents, and I keep hearing the same thing whispered in hallways." She stepped closer, studying Marisol's face with the intensity of someone reading a map in dangerous territory. "They keep saying, 'The nurse saved him?' Not Dr. Bannon, not the surgical team. The nurse." April's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "My husband is alive today because someone in that room refused to let pride kill him. I need to know who that someone was." Marisol felt tears welling despite her efforts to maintain composure. She couldn't speak without violating hospital orders, couldn't defend herself without risking everything she had left. But April's words, "someone refused to let pride kill him," cut straight to the heart of what had happened in that operating room. "I can't discuss—" "You don't have to," April said softly. The tears rolling down Marisol's cheeks were answer enough. "Oh, honey, what did they do to you?" Before Marisol could respond, Dr. Bannon's voice carried across the corridor. He approached with his characteristic confidence, white coat pristine, expression perfectly calibrated for concerned authority. "Mrs. Rusk," he said warmly, extending his hand toward April, "I wanted to check on you before you left for the evening. How are you holding up?" April turned toward him with visible effort, her protective instincts clearly warring with social politeness. "Dr. Bannon, thank you for everything." "Your husband's surgery was challenging," Bannon said, his tone striking the perfect balance of professional pride and humble concern. "The subclavian injury was well hidden, very difficult to identify initially, but once we located the source of the bleeding, the repair went smoothly." Marisol watched him weave the lie with masterful precision, transforming her emergency intervention into his diagnostic triumph. Each word felt like a physical blow, but she remained silent, trapped by administrative threats and institutional power. "The important thing," Bannon continued, is that Evan is stable and recovering well. You should be very proud of how strong he's been through this." April nodded mechanically, but her gaze kept drifting back to Marisol, who stood frozen in the corridor like a defendant awaiting verdict. "Well," Bannon said with practiced warmth, "I should let you get home to rest. Tomorrow will be another big day, as we monitor Evan's progress." He walked away with the satisfied stride of someone whose version of events had been officially accepted and recorded. April watched him go, then turned back to Marisol with eyes that held both gratitude and rage. "My husband is alive," she said quietly, "because of the woman he just ignored." Marisol finally made it to the parking garage, where her 15-year-old Honda waited in the employee section she might never see again. The security bag sat on her passenger seat like evidence of a crime she didn't commit. The drive home passed in a blur of familiar streets that felt foreign, traffic lights that seemed to last forever, and radio voices discussing a world that no longer included her professional identity. Her mother's small house sat on a quiet street in East Atlanta, its front porch light already glowing in the approaching dusk. Loretta Baptiste had moved here after her stroke, trading the independence of her larger home for proximity to Marisol's care and support. Marisol found her mother in the kitchen, preparing dinner with the careful movements of someone still relearning coordination after neurological trauma. Loretta looked up as her daughter entered, and her experienced eyes immediately noticed the tremor in Marisol's hands, the exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. "Baby girl," Loretta said softly, setting down her wooden spoon. "What happened?" Marisol tried to hold it together, tried to maintain the strong front she had perfected over years of medical crises and family emergencies. But her mother's gentle question broke through every defense she had constructed. "He stole it, Mama," she whispered, her voice cracking on each word. "Before Evan even woke up, before his family could thank me, before anyone could remember what really happened. Bannon stole the truth and made me the villain." That night, long after her mother had gone to bed, Marisol sat at her kitchen table staring at the formal suspension notice that had arrived by certified mail. The letterhead was crisp and official, the language cold and bureaucratic. Effective immediately, she was barred from all patient care activities pending the completion of a formal investigation into allegations of unauthorized medical practice and patient endangerment. The envelope had contained her career's death certificate, signed and sealed before she even knew it was terminal. Marisol sat at her mother's small kitchen table. The suspension letter spread before her like evidence of a crime she hadn't committed. The morning sun streamed through faded yellow curtains, casting everything in a light that should have been warm, but felt cold against her skin. She had read the document so many times the words blurred together into one continuous accusation. Across from her, Loretta Baptiste arranged her stroke medications in a weekly pill organizer, her movements deliberate and careful. The left side of her body still moved slower than the right, a permanent reminder of how quickly life could change without warning. "You gonna sit there staring at that paper all day?" Loretta asked without looking up from her pills. "Because staring never changed what's written on it." Marisol folded the letter and pushed it aside. "Maybe I should just take the suspension, keep my head down, wait for it to blow over." "Blow over?" Loretta's hands stilled on the pill bottles. "Baby, this ain't weather. This is a man trying to erase you. But if I fight back, I could lose my license completely. Then what happens to your care, your medications, this house?" Marisol's voice carried the weight of every financial responsibility she shouldered alone. "I can't risk losing everything." Loretta finally looked up, her dark eyes sharp with the wisdom that had carried her through decades of challenges. "Let me tell you something about staying quiet to protect what little you got. Silence never saved nobody from a bully. It just teaches them they can take more." She reached across the table and covered her daughter's hand with her own, the grip still strong despite the tremor that remained from her stroke. "Your daddy used to say, 'Some fights you lose, but some fights lose you if you don't take them.' This man took credit for your work. He called you a liar in front of all them people. You think he gonna stop there?" Marisol stared at their joined hands, feeling the calluses her mother had earned from 30 years at the post office, sorting mail and serving a community that barely noticed her dedication. "I'm scared, Mama." "Good. Scared people think before they move, but don't let scared turn into still." After breakfast, Marisol retreated to her childhood bedroom, now converted into a home office, and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a number she hadn't called in years: Dr. Solomon Vey. Solomon had been her surgical attending during her brief residency at Emory, the one supervisor who had seen her potential and pushed her to pursue thoracic surgery. When family crisis and hostile faculty reviews derailed her training, he had been the only one to offer genuine regret, rather than empty platitudes about different paths. The phone rang 3 times before his familiar voice answered. "This is Solomon. Dr. Vey, it's Marisol Baptiste. I don't know if you remember me, but Mari," his voice warmed immediately. "Of course I remember. How are you, dear? I need advice about something that happened at St. Gideon yesterday." There was a pause, and when Solomon spoke again, his tone had shifted to concern. "I've been hearing rumors from St. Gideon this morning. Something about an incident in OR3, Pierce Bannon's case. You've heard already?" Word travels fast in surgical circles, especially when it involves Pierce. "What exactly happened in that room, Mari?" She told him everything: the hidden arterial injury, Bannon's refusal to listen, the patient crashing while precious minutes ticked away, her decision to act despite his threats, the way she had saved Evan Rusk's life only to watch Bannon steal credit and destroy her career. Solomon listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of understanding or disapproval. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Mari, I need you to understand something about Pierce Bannon. This isn't the first time." "What do you mean?" "I've been consulting on patient safety reviews across several hospitals since retirement. Bannon's name appears in more incident reports than any surgeon should. But here's the pattern. Complications happen, nurses get blamed, and somehow Pierce always emerges looking heroic." Marisol felt her stomach tighten. "How many nurses?" "At least 6 that I can document over the past decade. All women. Most of them women of color. They challenge his judgment, something goes wrong, and suddenly they're the problem. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Because Pierce brings in millions in donor revenue. Because his patients tend to be wealthy and influential. Because hospitals would rather sacrifice a nurse than lose their star surgeon." Solomon's voice carried decades of institutional frustration. Until yesterday, none of those nurses had actually saved the patient in front of witnesses. 2 hours later, Marisol sat in Brew and Bean, a small cafe across the street from St. Gideon Medical Center. Through the window, she could see the hospital's main entrance, the place where her career had effectively ended less than 24 hours earlier. Tessa Vale arrived exactly on time, glancing nervously over her shoulder before sliding into the booth across from Marisol. The young scrub nurse looked exhausted, her usually bright demeanor replaced by the haunted expression of someone caught between truth and survival. "I shouldn't be here," Tessa whispered, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "If Celia Marr finds out I'm talking to you—" "I know, but I need to understand what's happening in there." Tessa looked around the cafe, ensuring no familiar faces lurked nearby. "They're making everyone sign statements about yesterday, about what happened in OR3. "What kind of statements?" "Official witness accounts. They brought in lawyers and everything. Each person has to write exactly what they saw, what they heard, what they remember about the surgery." Marisol leaned forward. "And what are people writing? What do you think?" Tessa's voice cracked with frustration. "Everyone's terrified. Dr. Mercer wrote that Dr. Bannon led the life-saving intervention. The residents are saying they followed Dr. Bannon's instructions throughout the procedure. Even the techs are claiming they don't remember you doing anything except assisting. But you were there. You saw everything. I saw you save that man's life while Bannon stood there like a statue." Tears began forming in Tessa's eyes. "I saw you make decisions that kept Evan Rusk's heart beating. But they're telling us that if our statements don't align with the official record, it could indicate memory problems or stress-related confusion. They're threatening your jobs. They're threatening everything. My student loans, my references, my future in nursing. They're making it clear that supporting your version of events would be career suicide. Marisol felt the familiar weight of institutional power crushing individual truth. So everyone's going to lie, not lie. Just remember differently. They sat in silence for a moment, watching hospital employees hurry past the cafe window on their way to shifts that would continue as if nothing had changed, as if justice and truth were luxuries the medical system couldn't afford. There might be something else, Tessa said suddenly, her voice barely audible. What? The overhead teaching camera, or 3, has a recording system for surgical education. If it was running during Evan's surgery. The rain drummed steadily against the narrow windows of Solomon Vey's cramped office on the 3rd floor of the Hartwell Medical Building. The space felt more like a converted storage room than a consultation office. Metal filing cabinets lined 2 walls. Stacks of medical journals created precarious towers on every surface, and the single desk lamp cast harsh shadows across Solomon's weathered face as he pulled manila folders from a locked drawer. Marisol sat across from him, her notebook open and pen ready. She had driven through the afternoon storm with questions burning in her mind, but now, watching Solomon's methodical preparation, she sensed those questions were about to become something much darker. What I'm about to show you stays between us until we decide how to proceed, Solomon said, his voice carrying the weight of institutional secrets. These are safety complaints, incident reports, and disciplinary records spanning the last 8 years at St. Gideon, Pierce Bannon's cases. He opened the first folder and spread several documents across the desk. Marisol recognized the hospital's official letterhead. The content made her stomach clench. Jennifer Walsh, surgical nurse, terminated for insubordination and patient endangerment, Solomon read from a disciplinary report dated 3 years earlier. According to the official record, she panicked during a cardiac surgery and questioned Dr. Bannon's surgical approach in front of the family. The patient survived, but Jennifer was accused of undermining confidence in the surgical team. What really happened? Marisol asked, though she suspected she already knew. Jennifer identified a perfusion problem that could have caused stroke. She alerted Bannon, who dismissed her concerns. She persisted, and he had her removed from the OR. 20 minutes later, the patient showed signs of cerebral hypoxia. Solomon's finger traced down the page. Bannon managed to correct the issue, but the delay caused permanent neurological damage. Jennifer was blamed for creating unnecessary distraction during a critical procedure. Marisol's pen moved across her notebook, capturing the details. Where is Jennifer now? Pediatric nursing in Birmingham. Couldn't get another surgical position anywhere in Georgia after Bannon's references. Solomon opened the second folder, revealing photocopied nursing notes with angry red correction marks scrawled across the margins. Patricia Gomez, charge nurse, written up for excessive documentation and inappropriate questioning of physician orders. She had been tracking inconsistencies in Bannon's operative notes, times that didn't match anesthesia records, procedures listed that contradicted the surgical supplies used. She was documenting his lies. Methodically, Patricia had 15 years of experience and knew when something didn't add up. But when she brought her concerns to the nursing supervisor, Bannon complained that she was creating a hostile work environment and interfering with patient care. What happened to her? Transferred to the night shift in the emergency department. Her concerns were buried in committee review. The discrepancies she identified were never investigated. Solomon reached for a thicker folder, hesitating before opening it. This one is different, Mari. This one involves a death. The documents inside made Marisol's hands shake. Death certificate, autopsy summary, family complaint forms, and at the center, a photo of a kind-faced elderly black woman with silver hair and gentle eyes. Viola Strickland, age 68, retired church administrator, grandmother of 4. She came to St. Gideon for gallbladder surgery last year. Routine procedure, low risk. Marisol studied Viola's photograph, seeing traces of her own mother in the woman's dignified expression. What went wrong? According to the OR nurse, Keisha Williams, Viola showed signs of internal bleeding during the procedure, blood pressure dropping, abdominal distension, classic symptoms of a nicked vessel. Keisha alerted Bannon immediately. He ignored her. Worse, he told her she was seeing problems that don't exist and ordered her to focus on her job. Meanwhile, Viola was bleeding internally for over 30 minutes before Bannon acknowledged the complication. Marisol read the autopsy findings, her medical training translating the clinical language into human tragedy. Hemorrhagic shock. She bled to death while they argued about whether she was bleeding. The family was told that surgical complications sometimes occur despite excellent care. They were assured that everything possible had been done. Bannon expressed his deepest condolences and waived his surgical fee as a gesture of sympathy. And Keisha Williams? Solomon's expression darkened. Terminated 2 weeks later for pattern of insubordination and failure to maintain appropriate professional boundaries. The hospital claimed she had been argumentative with physicians and created tension in the OR. Just like they're doing to me. Exactly like they're doing to you. Except this time, the patient lived. This time, there were too many witnesses to completely bury the truth. Marisol stared at the documents spread across Solomon's desk, a roadmap of institutional cruelty disguised as quality control. Each folder represented a nurse who had tried to save a patient, only to watch the system protect the person who had endangered them. How many others? She asked. These are just the cases I could document. There are probably others, nurses who were quietly transferred, pressured to resign, or simply learned to stay silent. Solomon gathered the folders carefully. But here's what's different about your situation, Mari. Evan Rusk lived. His family knows something unusual happened. The OR staff saw you save him, even if they're afraid to say so publicly. And if we can prove what really happened, we expose the entire pattern, not just what Pierce did to you, but what he's been doing to nurses for years, what the hospital has been covering up. Marisol thought of Viola Strickland's gentle face, of Jennifer Walsh losing her surgical career, of Patricia Gomez relegated to night shifts for telling the truth. Then she thought of Keisha Williams, fired for trying to save an elderly grandmother's life. They're not just protecting Bannon, she said. They're protecting a system that values reputation over lives. Which is why your testimony matters so much. You didn't just witness Bannon's incompetence, you corrected it. You proved that the nurses he's been dismissing and destroying actually knew what they were talking about. Solomon pulled out a fresh legal pad and placed it in front of Marisol. I need you to write down everything you remember from that OR. Every word Bannon said, every decision you made, every detail about Evan's condition and your intervention. Write it exactly as it happened, while your memory is still fresh. Marisol picked up her pen, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about ensuring that Viola Strickland's death meant something, that Jennifer Walsh's career destruction served a purpose, that no other nurse would face Bannon's cruelty alone. She began to write, her pen moving steadily across the paper as the rain continued its rhythmic percussion against the windows. She documented Evan's deteriorating vitals, the bluish mottling she had noticed, her careful explanation of the thoracic outlet injury that Bannon had missed. She recorded his dismissive responses, his escalating anger, his refusal to consider her clinical assessment. And then she reached the moment that had changed everything, the words that had revealed the true depths of Bannon's arrogance. Her pen slowed as she captured them exactly. If you save him, I'll quit. The administrative wing of St. Gideon Medical Center smelled like expensive carpet and fresh coffee. Marisol walked down the polished hallway, her footsteps echoing off marble floors that probably cost more than most nurses made in a year. Everything here was designed to intimidate, from the oil paintings of past board chairmen to the thick mahogany doors that whispered money and power. She stopped outside Conference Room A, straightening her blazer and checking the time. 8:30 exactly. Professional, punctual. Everything they expected from someone defending herself against charges she never should have faced. The door opened before she could knock. Celia Marr stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost $3,000. Her smile was sharp as glass. "Ms. Baptiste, please, come in." The conference room was all dark wood and leather chairs, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the hospital's healing garden. Marisol had always found it ironic that the people who made life-and-death decisions about patient care worked in rooms that looked nothing like the places where actual healing happened. Two men in expensive suits sat at the far end of the table, hospital attorneys, their briefcases open and legal pads ready. Celia gestured to a chair facing them, positioning Marisol like a defendant in a corporate courtroom. "This is preliminary," Celia began, settling into her chair with practiced authority. "We're simply trying to understand what happened in Operating Room 3 2 days ago. Dr. Bannon has submitted his report, and we need to hear your perspective." Marisol opened her folder and pulled out the detailed account she had written in Solomon's office. "I documented everything as accurately as possible, Mr. Rusk showed signs of obstructive shock caused by an expanding hemothorax and possible arterial injury near the thoracic outlet. I alerted Dr. Bannon multiple times, but he dismissed my assessment." One of the attorneys looked up from his notes. "Dr. Bannon's report indicates that you became agitated when he declined to follow your suggestions. He describes your behavior as increasingly erratic and confrontational. That's not accurate. I remained calm and professional throughout the procedure, even when Dr. Bannon publicly humiliated me in front of the surgical team." Celia's expression sharpened. "Humiliated is a strong word, Ms. Baptiste. Dr. Bannon is a world-renowned cardiothoracic surgeon. Perhaps you misinterpreted standard OR communication as personal criticism. He told me I would never be a surgeon. He said that if I could save Mr. Rusk, he would quit. Those aren't standard communications. They're deliberate insults designed to silence me while the patient was dying." The second attorney scribbled notes furiously. "According to Dr. Bannon, you then grabbed surgical instruments without authorization and performed procedures outside your scope of practice. He describes it as a nurse having what he called a dangerous fantasy about being a doctor." Heat rose in Marisol's chest, but she kept her voice steady. Mr. Rusk's blood pressure had dropped to 60/30. His central venous pressure was rising, indicating cardiac compression. The bluish mottling around his chest suggested internal bleeding above the operative field. I identified the source, a torn intercostal artery feeding into an expanding hemothorax, and performed temporary arterial control while directing rapid transfusion protocol. "Your interpretation," Celia interrupted, "doesn't outrank Dr. Bannon's professional assessment. He's performed over 3,000 cardiac surgeries. His judgment regarding patient care and OR protocol carries significantly more weight than yours. His judgment nearly killed Evan Rusk." Silence fell across the room like a blade. The attorneys exchanged glances. Celia's smile disappeared entirely. "That's a serious accusation, Ms. Baptiste. Dr. Bannon saved Mr. Rusk's life. The surgical note clearly documents his identification and repair of the vascular injury. A surgical note that was altered after the procedure." "Be very careful," Celia said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Questioning the integrity of our medical records is a significant step, one that could have serious consequences for your nursing license." Marisol met her gaze without flinching. The truth doesn't change based on who writes it down afterward. The meeting ended with cold handshakes and vague promises to review all available information. Marisol gathered her documents, feeling the weight of institutional power pressing down on her like a physical force. These people didn't care about facts. They cared about protecting their investment, and Pierce Bannon was worth millions in donor funding. She was walking toward the elevators when footsteps echoed behind her in the empty corridor. She turned to see Bannon approaching, his surgical scrubs replaced by an expensive suit and tie. His smile was confident, predatory. "Mari, how did your meeting go?" Fine. I hope you understand this isn't personal. It's just business. The hospital has standards, protocols. We can't have nurses thinking they can override physician judgment whenever they disagree with treatment decisions. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to an intimate whisper that made her skin crawl. The thing is, Mari, invisible people keep their paychecks. Visible people, the ones who make scenes, cause problems, challenge authority, they tend to find themselves looking for work elsewhere. And no medical board in this country is going to believe a nurse's word over mine. Marisol looked at him for a long moment, studying his confident smirk, the way he assumed his reputation would always shield him from consequences. Invisible people see everything, she said quietly. His smile faded. Something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even fear. He had expected her to apologize, to beg for mercy, to accept whatever crumbs of career he was willing to leave her. Instead, she walked away, leaving him standing alone in the corridor. Her phone buzzed as she reached the parking garage. An email from Human Resources, copied to Celia and the hospital's chief medical officer. The subject line made her blood turn cold. Nursing license review, state board referral pending. She dialed Solomon's number with shaking fingers. "They're forwarding the complaint to the nursing board," she said when he answered. "We need that video immediately." The Riverside Public Library closed at 9, but the study rooms stayed open until 10 for cardholders. Room C was tucked in the back corner, away from the main circulation desk, where curious eyes might recognize faces from the evening news. Marisol arrived first, choosing a chair that faced the door. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her notebook and pen on the scratched wooden table. Solomon entered next, moving slowly but with purpose. At 72, his back was bent from decades of surgery, but his mind remained sharp as a scalpel. He carried a worn leather briefcase and nodded grimly at Marisol. "Any word from the others?" "April's coming. Tessa said she'd be here by 8:15. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights and distant conversations from the main library. Marisol felt like a criminal meeting co-conspirators, which was exactly what the hospital wanted. Make her feel guilty for seeking truth. Make her question whether fighting back was worth the risk. April Rusk pushed through the glass door, looking determined but exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes, wrinkled scrubs from spending hours at Evan's bedside, told the story of a woman who hadn't slept properly in days. She carried a manila folder thick with papers. "How is he?" Solomon asked. "Better. Awake for longer periods. The doctors say his recovery is remarkable considering—" She paused, looking directly at Marisol, "considering how close he came to dying. What does he remember?" April sat down heavily, placing the folder on the table. "More than I expected. He remembers hearing voices during the surgery. Specifically, he remembers a woman's voice telling him to stay alive, to keep fighting. He said it felt like someone was fighting for him when he couldn't fight for himself." Marisol's throat tightened. She had whispered to Evan during those critical moments, the way she always spoke to unconscious patients. Some part of her believed they could hear, that her voice might anchor them to life when everything else was slipping away. "That could be powerful testimony," Solomon said quietly. "It gets better. Evan wants to know who really saved him." When Bannon came by this morning for his hero visit, complete with hospital photographer, Evan asked specific questions about the surgery timeline. Bannon got flustered when Evan mentioned hearing the woman's voice. The door opened again, and Tessa hurried in, clutching her phone and a small stack of papers. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a determined gleam that hadn't been there during their cafe meeting. "Sorry I'm late. I had to wait until my shift supervisor went home." She sat down and immediately pulled out a printed spreadsheet. "This is the access log for OR3's teaching camera system. The surgery was recorded, all 2 hours and 37 minutes of it. The file was automatically archived under Dr. Bannon's department account because he's listed as the primary surgeon." Solomon leaned forward. "Where's the archive stored?" "Hospital server, but there are backup copies sent to the Medical Education Department and the Surgical Quality Review Board. standard protocol for teaching surgeries involving residents. So even if Bannon deletes his copy, Marisol began. There should be others, Tessa finished. At least in theory. April opened her folder and spread several documents across the table. I've been researching patient rights. As Evan's wife and medical power of attorney, I can request the complete surgical record, including all video documentation, operative notes, medication logs, and staff communications. Will they honor that request? Solomon asked. They have to. Georgia patient rights law is clear. And I found something else. She pulled out a highlighter-marked printout. If there's evidence of altered medical records or staff retaliation, I can request an independent review by the State Medical Board. Tessa's eyes widened. You think they'll actually alter the video? They've already altered the operative notes, Marisol said. Bannon's version makes it sound like he identified and controlled the bleeding himself, with me providing basic assistance. That's why we need to move fast, Solomon warned. Hospitals can make evidence disappear quickly when their reputation is at risk. I've seen it before. Server crashes, accidental deletions, files that suddenly become corrupted. They spent the next hour planning their approach with military precision. April would file the formal records request first thing Monday morning, using her legal status as Evan's wife to demand everything: video files, audio logs, medication timestamps, blood product usage, operative notes, both original and revised versions. Tessa would quietly document what she could legally access through her normal work duties. She had legitimate reasons to review surgical supplies and equipment logs for quality control purposes. If anyone asked, she was simply doing her job. Marisol would prepare a detailed sworn statement describing the medical emergency, Bannon's dismissive responses, and her step-by-step intervention. Solomon would help her with the precise medical terminology to ensure the statement was bulletproof. The video should prove everything, April said, her voice carrying the first real hope Marisol had heard since this nightmare began. If it shows you identifying the problem, performing the repair, and saving Evan's life while Bannon stood there doing nothing, it would end his career, Solomon finished quietly, and probably trigger investigations into other cases. Good, Tessa said with surprising fierceness. Do you know how many nurses have been blamed for his mistakes? How many patients have suffered because no one was brave enough to challenge him? Marisol felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in days. Genuine hope. The video existed. They had allies. The truth had been preserved, waiting in some digital archive to vindicate everything she had done. They were gathering their papers when Tessa's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her face went white. What is it? April asked. Tessa held up the phone with a shaking hand. The text message was from her nursing supervisor. Report to Human Resources, Monday at 7 a.m. Bring union representative if desired. The hope in the room evaporated like smoke. They all understood what that message meant. Tessa was about to be fired for helping them. Marisol sat on her mother's worn couch, staring at her phone as it rang again. The third call in 10 minutes. She already knew what Tessa was going to tell her, but she answered anyway. They fired me. Tessa's voice cracked through the speaker, high and breathless with panic. They said I violated patient privacy by accessing surgical logs without authorization. Where are you now? Sitting in my car in the parking garage. Security walked me out like I was some kind of criminal. They took my badge, my access cards, everything. A sob escaped. Marisol, I have student loans. My daughter needs her asthma medication. I can't afford to lose this job. Loretta looked up from her crossword puzzle, her face tight with anger. She had been listening to every conversation, watching her daughter fight a battle that seemed designed to destroy good people. What about your union representative? Marisol asked, though she already suspected the answer. They said the union can't help with privacy violations. That's considered professional misconduct, not a workplace dispute. Tessa's breathing was ragged. And there's more. The OR video, the one we were counting on, it's gone. Marisol's stomach dropped. What do you mean, gone? Human Resources said it was automatically overwritten due to storage policy. They claimed the hospital only keeps teaching videos for 30 days unless specifically flagged for retention. Tessa's voice turned bitter. Funny how nobody mentioned that storage policy when we thought the video could save me. The phone felt heavy in Marisol's hand. Without that recording, they had nothing but her word against Bannon's. A suspended nurse against a celebrated surgeon with 20 years of pristine reputation. I'm so sorry, Tessa. This is my fault. If I hadn't asked you to help— Don't! Tessa's voice turned sharp. Don't you dare blame yourself for their corruption. You saved a man's life, and they're punishing everyone who knows the truth. After Tessa hung up, Marisol called April to deliver the devastating news. April's response was swift and frustrated. Her formal records request had been delayed indefinitely. The hospital claimed they needed to review patient privacy implications before releasing any surgical documentation to family members. They're stalling, April said. Evan keeps asking about the timeline, and I don't know what to tell him. He remembers your voice, but every official document says Bannon saved his life. Then came the final blow. Solomon called an hour later, his voice grim. Check the hospital website. They just posted something you need to see. Marisol opened her laptop and navigated to St. Gideon's homepage. The featured story hit her like a physical punch. The headline read, "Hero Surgeon Launches Excellence Fund to Honor Patient He Saved." The photograph showed Dr. Pierce Bannon in a perfectly pressed suit, standing beside Evan's hospital bed with a warm, charitable smile. Evan looked exhausted and pale, still connected to monitors, while April held their young daughter. The family appeared grateful, but drained. Exactly the kind of image that would tug at donors' heartstrings. The article described how Dr. Bannon had performed a miraculous emergency intervention to save the life of firefighter Evan Rusk. It mentioned Bannon's quick thinking and surgical expertise in identifying a rare vascular injury that other surgeons might have missed. The Evan Rusk Surgical Excellence Fund will support advanced surgical training and emergency medical education at St. Gideon Medical Center, the article continued. Dr. Bannon hopes this initiative will ensure other patients receive the same life-saving care that preserved Mr. Rusk's future with his family. Loretta wheeled her chair over to read the screen. Her hands trembled, not from her stroke, but from pure rage. "That evil man is raising money off the life you saved," she whispered. Marisol stared at Bannon's smiling face in the photograph. He looked so genuine, so caring, the perfect surgeon hero who had snatched a father back from death's door. The donors would love him. The hospital board would praise him. His reputation would grow even brighter. Meanwhile, she was facing a nursing board review that had been moved up by 2 weeks, an obvious sign that someone wanted her case resolved quickly and quietly. Solomon's warning echoed in her mind from their earlier conversation. Once Bannon becomes the public hero, once his version becomes the official story that donors and administrators have invested in, the hospital will bury the truth permanently. No one will want to hear that their surgical star is a fraud. The injustice was suffocating. Tessa was unemployed. April's family was being used as props. Evan would never know his real savior, and Bannon would profit from a lie while she lost everything. Marisol closed the laptop and put her head in her hands at the kitchen table. The fight felt impossible. They had no video, no allies with institutional power, and no way to prove what really happened in that operating room. But then, sitting in the quiet desperation of her mother's kitchen, something sparked in her memory. During the emergency, while she was directing the resuscitation, Dr. Mercer had been calling out medication dosages and timing markers for his anesthesia record. He had activated the voice dictation backup system to capture every detail of the crisis. That audio log would be stored separately from the surgical camera system. The executive conference room at St. Gideon Medical Center smelled like fresh coffee and fear. Celia Marr sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, her navy suit pressed to perfection. She had arranged the chairs carefully. One isolated seat for Marisol, two hospital administrators flanking her own position, the disciplinary packet stacked neatly beside her water glass. This was supposed to be simple. A quick internal review, maybe an apology from the troublesome nurse, definitely a signature on some settlement papers that would make the whole mess disappear. The door opened. Marisol walked in first, wearing her best black dress and carrying a leather folder. Behind her came Dr. Solomon Vey in a crisp white shirt, his gray hair combed back like he was heading to court. April Rusk followed, her red eyes fierce with determination. Then came the wheelchair. Evan Rusk looked pale but alert. His firefighter's shoulders filled out the hospital gown someone had thrown over his street clothes. The oxygen cannula under his nose made a soft hissing sound as he breathed. Tessa Vale entered last, clutching a manila envelope against her chest like a shield. Celia's coffee cup rattled against the saucer. "This is a personnel matter. Family members and terminated employees have no business. My husband nearly died in your operating room," April said, settling into the chair beside Evan's wheelchair. "That makes this my business." Behind them, the conference room door remained open. Through the hallway window, Celia could see the hospital lobby. Local news crews waited outside the main entrance. Reporters with notepads, camera operators checking their equipment. Her throat went dry. "Mrs. Rusk, I understand you're concerned, but internal reviews require—" "Nothing internal about this anymore," Solomon said quietly, taking his seat across from Celia. "Not when patient safety is involved." The door opened again. Dr. Pierce Bannon strode in wearing his pristine white coat, the one embroidered with Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery in navy thread. His silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights. He nodded to Celia like they were old friends, then glanced at the assembled group with practiced disdain. "Quite a gathering," Bannon said, claiming the chair to Celia's right, "though I'm not sure what we hope to accomplish with so many observers." April's hands clenched in her lap. Evan's jaw tightened. Marisol said nothing. She opened her leather folder and arranged several documents in front of her with calm precision. Celia cleared her throat, trying to regain control. "We're here to discuss scope of practice concerns regarding Nurse Baptiste's actions during Mr. Rusk's surgery. The hospital maintains that." "The hospital maintains lies," April said, her voice cutting through Celia's corporate smoothness like a blade. "And my husband's alive because someone in that room refused to let pride kill him." Bannon's smile never wavered. "Mrs. Rusk, I understand emotions run high after trauma surgery, but the medical facts are clear. I identified the vascular injury and performed the life-saving repair. Nurse Baptiste assisted competently, but—" "Show them the timeline," April said to Solomon. The retired surgeon opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Evan's cardiac monitor recorded every heartbeat during the surgery. The data shows exactly when his condition deteriorated and exactly when it stabilized." He spread the printout across the table. The cardiac rhythm strips looked like mountain ranges of peaks and valleys, timestamps marking each critical moment. "Blood pressure collapsed at 1437, Solomon continued, his finger tracing the data. "Oxygen saturation dropped to 82%. Heart rate became irregular. Then, at 1441, pressure began rising. Rhythm stabilized. Recovery commenced." Bannon leaned forward. "Which confirms my timeline. I identified the bleeding source and the anesthesia medication record shows something different," Tessa said, her voice shaking but determined. She pulled papers from her envelope. Dr. Mercer documented every drug, every timing, every emergency protocol. The vascular clamp was requested at 1438, the fresh scalpel at 1439, transfusion accelerated at 1440. "Under my direction," Bannon said smoothly. Solomon smiled. It was not a kind expression. "The supply log shows who actually requested those instruments." Another document hit the table. Official hospital inventory records, timestamps, staff signatures. "Marisol Baptiste requested the vascular clamp at 1438. Solomon read aloud, "2 minutes before you ordered the same instrument, Dr. Bannon." The room went quiet except for the soft hiss of Evan's oxygen. Celia stared at the papers spreading across her conference table like evidence at a crime scene. The neat timeline she had planned was dissolving into documented facts that contradicted everything Bannon had reported. These records can be interpreted different ways, she said weakly. Can they? Solomon asked. He looked directly at Celia, then at Bannon. Because there's one more piece of evidence that removes all doubt about interpretation. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small digital recording device. The anesthesia event marker system was running during Mr. Rusk's surgery. Every word spoken in that operating room was captured for medication timing and emergency documentation. Marisol finally spoke, her voice steady and clear. Play it. Bannon's confident smile flickered. Celia's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. Solomon placed the recording device in the center of the table and looked around the room. Mrs. Marr, would you like to hear what really happened when your patient was dying? The room went completely still. Solomon's finger hovered over the play button. The small digital device sat in the center of the polished conference table like a loaded weapon. This recording is confidential medical, Celia began. Patient safety trumps confidentiality, April's attorney said sharply. Play it. Solomon pressed the button. Static crackled through the speaker. Then the sounds of the operating room filled the conference room. Monitor beeps, suction, the soft hiss of ventilation equipment. Voices layered over the mechanical symphony of emergency surgery. Dr. Mercer's voice came through first, professional but tense. Pressures dropping to 90/50, heart rate climbing to 120. Then Marisol's voice, calm and clear. Dr. Bannon, the bleeding pattern suggests thoracic outlet injury, the pressure differential and venous collapse. Bannon's voice cut through like a whip crack. Hand me what I ask for. Stop trying to diagnose. In the conference room, present-day Bannon shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His white coat suddenly looked less like armor. The recording continued. Monitor alarms grew more urgent. Dr. Mercer's voice carried rising fear. Oxygen sat dropping to 85. We're losing him. Marisol again, urgent but controlled. We need to extend the access. The bleed is above the operative field. Near the subclavian? You'll never be a surgeon, Mari. Bannon's recorded voice dripped with contempt. Hand me instruments, not opinions. April's hands clenched into fists. Evan's face darkened with understanding. The audio captured the chaos of a patient crashing. Alarms screaming. Dr. Mercer calling out falling vitals. Pressure 70/40. Irregular rhythm. We're about to lose pulse. Then Bannon's voice, loud and mocking, cutting through the emergency. If you save him, I'll quit. The words hung in the conference room air like smoke from a gun. Silence on the recording. Just monitors screaming. Then Marisol's voice, steady as stone. Tessa, I need suction here, now. Dr. Mercer, increase the transfusion rate and prepare for rapid sequence. What are you? Bannon's recorded voice, confused. The tear is here. Marisol's voice carried absolute certainty. Arterial injury at the thoracic outlet. I need the vascular clamp. Sounds of rapid movement. Metal instruments clinking. Suction working. Dear God, Dr. Mercer's voice whispered through the speaker. She found it. More sounds. Controlled chaos becoming organized precision. Apply pressure here while I get control, Marisol directed. Keep the field dry. Clamp angle needs to be, yes, that's it. Monitor tones began to change. The desperate alarms softened into steadier beeps. Pressure's coming up, Dr. Mercer announced. Relief flooded his recorded voice. 90/60. Heart rate stabilizing. Sinus rhythm returning, Marisol confirmed. Transfusion can slow to maintenance rate. The recording continued for several more minutes, capturing Marisol calmly directing the repair while Bannon remained mostly silent. Solomon stopped the playback. The conference room sat in absolute quiet. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Bannon's face had gone ashen. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead despite the cool room. Celia stared at the recording device like it had bitten her. April broke the silence first. That's not the story you told us in the waiting room. Bannon opened his mouth, then closed it. His legendary confidence had evaporated. "There must be some context," he finally managed. "The context is crystal clear," Solomon said. He pulled out another document. "This is the operative note you filed, Dr. Bannon. It states that you identified and repaired the vascular injury at 14:45. He placed the cardiac monitor strips beside the operative note. "But the patient data shows the bleed was controlled at 14:41, 4 minutes earlier than you claimed." Tessa leaned forward. "And the supply records show Marisol requested the vascular clamp at 14:38, before the injury was supposedly identified." "You're taking this out of context," Bannon said, his voice cracking slightly. "Were you supervising when you told her she'd never be a surgeon?" April asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Were you supervising when you dared her to save my husband?" Evan added, speaking for the first time since entering the room. Bannon looked around the table desperately. His usual allies, Celia, hospital administration, the weight of his reputation, offered no protection against the recorded truth. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, sweat now visible on his collar. The operative note reflects fraud," Solomon said bluntly. "You falsified medical records to steal credit for a procedure you didn't perform." The retired surgeon's voice carried the authority of 40 years in medicine. "Worse, you filed a complaint against the nurse who saved this man's life." Bannon stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this." He headed toward the door. Evan's voice stopped him cold. "Doctor, you said you'd quit." Bannon froze halfway to the door. His shoulders sagged like a man who'd just watched his life crumble in real time. Evan's words echoed in the silent room. "Doctor, you said you'd quit." The speakerphone on the conference table crackled to life. Celia's face went white as she recognized the voice of Dr. Margaret Hartwell, chair of St. Gideon's Board of Directors. "This is an emergency conference call, Doctor." Hartwell's voice carried the authority of someone who'd built hospitals and buried scandal. "I've been listening to the proceedings through the administrative feed." Celia's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. She hadn't authorized any feed. "Dr. Hartwell," Celia stammered, "this is an internal personnel matter." "This stopped being internal the moment a patient nearly died." Dr. Hartwell cut her off. "Dr. Bannon, effective immediately, you are suspended from all surgical privileges pending termination and medical board investigation." Bannon spun around, his face flushed red. "You can't." "I can, and I have. Security will escort you from the premises. Your access cards, pager, and hospital identification are to be surrendered within the hour." The room watched Bannon's world collapse in real time. His jaw worked silently. Decades of arrogance stripped away by his own recorded words. Dr. Hartwell's voice continued, crisp and final. "Ms. Marr, you are placed on administrative leave effective immediately. Evidence tampering, retaliation against staff, and falsified incident reporting constitute gross misconduct." Celia's polished composure cracked completely. "There are procedures." "The procedures you violated when you buried evidence and intimidated witnesses?" Dr. Hartwell's voice carried ice. "Your employment status will be reviewed by outside counsel." She turned to the speakerphone with desperate professionalism. The hospital's reputation depends on integrity, not cover-ups," Dr. Hartwell said. "Ms. Vale, you are hereby reinstated with full back pay and benefits. The disciplinary action against you has been expunged from your record." Tessa's eyes filled with tears of relief. She'd been carrying the weight of unemployment and fear since her firing. "Ms. Baptiste," Dr. Hartwell continued, "your suspension is lifted immediately. Your nursing license review is cancelled. The hospital will issue a public correction, acknowledging your role in saving Mr. Rusk's life." Marisol remained calm, but April saw her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "Furthermore," Dr. Hartwell added, "St. Gideon Medical Center will cooperate fully with independent review of all surgical cases involving Dr. Bannon over the past 5 years. Patient families deserve the truth." Solomon leaned forward slightly. Dr. Hartwell, several former staff members have already contacted me about similar incidents. They're prepared to provide testimony. Good. We want complete transparency. The board chair's voice carried grim determination. The medical board will have full access to all records, personnel files, and witness statements. Bannon finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. 40 years of service, 40 years of bullying staff and endangering patients, Evan said from his wheelchair. How many people died because nurses were afraid to speak up? The question hit like a physical blow. Bannon's face went gray. April stood slowly, positioning herself between Bannon and the door. Her voice carried the quiet fury of a woman who'd almost lost everything. My husband flatlined on that table, she said, looking directly into Bannon's eyes. His heart stopped beating. His pressure collapsed. You stood there arguing while he died. Bannon tried to step around her, but April moved with him. She saved him. April's voice grew stronger. The woman you mocked, the woman you tried to destroy, the woman whose voice he remembered when he woke up. Tears ran down April's cheeks, but her voice never wavered. My daughter still has a father because Marisol Baptiste refused to let your pride kill him. Bannon's mouth worked silently. For the first time in decades, he had no answer. Get out, April said quietly. Just get out. Bannon pushed past her and fled the room. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, each step carrying him further from the career he'd built on stolen credit and buried truth. The conference room sat in heavy silence. Outside, camera flashes flickered through the windows as reporters captured the story that would remake St. Gideon's reputation. Solomon's phone buzzed with incoming calls. Former nurses who'd been waiting years for someone to speak up. Former patients' families who'd suspected something was wrong. The truth was spreading faster than the hospital could contain it. Dr. Hartwell's voice returned through the speaker. Ms. Baptiste, the board would like to discuss your future role here. We believe St. Gideon would benefit from your leadership in patient safety and surgical oversight. Marisol looked at her mother, who nodded with fierce pride. I'll consider it, Marisol said carefully, but only if real changes happen. Not just for me, for every nurse who was silenced. Understood? We'll be in touch within 24 hours. The call ended. The room began to empty slowly. Tessa hugged Marisol tightly, whispering thank you through her tears. Evan shook Solomon's hand, then Marisol's, his eyes bright with gratitude. April approached last. I don't know how to thank you. Just make sure it doesn't happen to someone else, Marisol replied. As they prepared to leave, Loretta appeared in the doorway. She'd been waiting in the lobby, watching the reporters gather outside. You ready to go home, baby girl? Loretta asked. Marisol nodded. She picked up her purse and walked toward the door, not as a suspended employee being escorted out, but as someone who'd fought for truth and won. They walked together through St. Gideon's main lobby. Security nodded respectfully instead of watching suspiciously. Staff members who'd avoided her eyes for days now offered quiet smiles and words of support. Outside, cameras clicked rapidly as Marisol and Loretta emerged into the afternoon sunlight. Reporters called out questions, but Marisol kept walking, her mother's hand steady on her arm. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't running from the truth. She was walking toward whatever came next. 3 months later, morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of St. Gideon's newly renamed Patient Safety and Surgical Training Suite. The gleaming simulation operating room looked nothing like the tense battlefield where Marisol had once fought for Evan's life. Clean white surfaces reflected the light. New equipment hummed softly. The smell of antiseptic carried hope instead of fear. Marisol stood at the head of the training table, wearing surgical scrubs with Director OR Patient Safety and Equity Standards embroidered below her name. The nursing board had cleared her completely. The medical board had approved her funded pathway to complete surgical training at Emory University's partner program. The settlement from St. Gideon would cover Loretta's care for years to come. But none of those victories felt as meaningful as this moment, teaching the next generation to see what she had learned to recognize. Emergency vascular control, Marisol said to the group of residents gathered around the simulation table. Most of you will never face thoracic outlet bleeding, but the principles apply everywhere. Recognition, speed, precision. The residents watched intently. 3 months ago, they would have dismissed her as just a nurse. Now they knew better. The story of Pierce Bannon's fall had spread through every hospital in Atlanta. Marisol's name carried respect that couldn't be stolen or buried. Dr. Sarah Kim, the new chief of surgery, observed quietly from the corner. She'd been hired specifically to rebuild the department's culture after Bannon's termination. The medical board investigation had uncovered 6 preventable deaths linked to his arrogance and cover-ups. 3 families were filing lawsuits. His medical license was permanently revoked. The key, Marisol continued, is not waiting for permission to see the obvious. Blood pressure falls, central venous pressure rises, chest mottling appears. These signs don't lie, even when people do. A young resident raised her hand. But what if the attending disagrees with your assessment? Marisol's expression grew serious. Then you document everything. You speak clearly. You don't back down. And if someone tells you to stay quiet while a patient dies, you remember that silence never saved anyone. Tessa entered the training room carrying a tablet and clipboard. Her new role as nurse education coordinator for protected reporting had transformed her from a frightened observer into a confident advocate. She'd already helped 12 staff members report safety concerns without retaliation. The Morrison family is here for the 10 o'clock tour, Tessa whispered to Marisol. And the Rusk family just arrived. Marisol nodded. The Morrison family had lost their father to one of Bannon's covered-up mistakes. They'd become powerful advocates for transparency. The new policies they'd helped create would prevent future families from suffering the same loss. Continue with the simulation, Marisol told the residents. Dr. Kim will observe the next scenario. She stepped into the hallway where Evan waited with April and their 6-year-old daughter, Emma. Evan looked strong and healthy, the gray pallor of near-death replaced by the robust color of a man grateful to be alive. He carried a small bouquet of sunflowers and something in his other hand. Marie! Emma ran forward with the fearless enthusiasm of a child who'd been told her daddy's guardian angel worked at the hospital. Hey there, sweetheart. Marisol knelt to hug the little girl who might have grown up without a father. Daddy says you fixed his heart, Emma announced proudly. Your daddy's heart was already perfect, Marisol replied. I just helped it keep beating. Evan stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion he'd never learned to hide. We brought these for your new office. He handed her the sunflowers, then opened his other palm to reveal a firefighter's challenge coin, a small metal disc given only to those who'd earned brotherhood through courage. This is for saving one of ours, he said simply. Brothers don't forget. Marisol accepted the coin, feeling its weight. You don't owe me anything, Evan. I owe you everything, he replied. My daughter, my wife, my life. April squeezed Marisol's hand. The whole city knows what you did. The mayor wants to give you a commendation. Solomon appeared at the end of the hallway, walking slowly but steadily. His patient safety consulting work had expanded dramatically since Bannon's exposure. Hospitals across Georgia were requesting his oversight. At 72, he'd found new purpose in the fight he'd been waging quietly for decades. How are the residents? He asked, joining their small group. Learning to listen, Marisol replied. Learning to trust what they see instead of what they're told to see. Solomon smiled with deep satisfaction. He'd trained Marisol years ago, watched institutional racism steal her surgical dreams, then witnessed her reclaim them through pure courage. Her success vindicated every lesson he'd tried to teach about medicine serving truth instead of hierarchy. They walked back toward the training room together. Through the glass doors, Marisol could see the residents working through the emergency scenario. Dr. Kim offered gentle corrections when they hesitated or second-guessed obvious findings. At the back of the room, a young black nursing student stood nervously near the wall. Her name tag read, Keisha Washington, RN student. She watched the demonstration with hungry eyes, but stayed safely distant, as if getting too close might invite unwanted attention. Marisol recognized that look. The careful invisibility, the fear of standing out, the knowledge that one mistake could cost everything while others received endless second chances. She approached slowly, not wanting to startle the young woman. "I'm Marisol," she said gently. "What's your name?" "Keisha," the student replied softly. "I'm sorry. I know I'm supposed to stay back here." "Who told you that?" Keisha's eyes widened. I thought." Marisol understood. The lessons of institutional hierarchy were taught early and reinforced constantly. Stay quiet. Don't presume. Know your place. "Come with me," Marisol said, extending her hand. She led Keisha to the front of the room where the residents clustered around the simulation table. Their conversation quieted as the two women approached. "Everyone," Marisol announced, "this is Keisha, one of our nursing students. She's going to observe the next scenario from here." One resident shifted uncomfortably. "Is there enough room?" "There's always room for the person who might see what we miss," Marisol said firmly. "The best person in the room is the one who sees the problem first." Keisha's posture straightened slightly. Her fear began transforming into something else, possibility. Marisol moved to the instrument table and selected a scalpel from the sterile tray. The blade caught the morning light as she held it up for the class to see. Her hand was perfectly steady. No tremor of doubt or shame. No hesitation born from other people's limitations. "This," she said clearly, "is a tool for saving lives. It doesn't care about your title. It doesn't care about your pedigree. It only cares about your skill and your courage to use it when someone needs you." The room listened in complete silence. "I spent years believing I had to prove I belonged here," Marisol continued. "I thought if I worked hard enough and stayed quiet enough, someone would eventually give me permission to be excellent." She looked directly at Keisha, then at each resident in turn. "But excellence doesn't wait for permission. Truth doesn't need approval. And when someone is dying, the only thing that matters is whether you can save them." Marisol lifted the scalpel higher, letting everyone see it clearly. "I was never pretending to be a surgeon," she said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I was preparing." If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.